Hey guys, tonight we begin with something quietly brilliant. Before hours, minutes, and wristwatches, before ticking clocks and vibrating phone alerts, there were shadows and bowls. You're waking up in ancient Egypt, about 3,000 years before your modern alarm app decided to fail you again. And guess what? The entire kingdom is already ticking. Without ticking, you're surrounded by sun-baked courtyards, long stone corridors, and the sleepy yawn of the Nile drifting past the banks. Somewhere nearby, someone's feeding a cat with more political power than you'll ever have. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not royalty, not a priest, just an ordinary soul sleeping on the rooftop of a mud brick house in Thebes. The breeze is dry, but tolerable. You hear birds, those loud, opinionated ibis, and down below, a market woman is already yelling about onions. The sun hasn't fully cleared the horizon yet, but it doesn't have to. In Egypt, the day begins when the shadows do. You stretch, and then you see it. The neighbor's dog is casting a long, slim silhouette against the wall. That's your unofficial signal. It's morning. Time to move. Most people you know don't know what time it is. Not like you do today. No number clicks over. No digital glow tells you it's 6:48 a.m. Instead, everyone around you reads the light. They live by its texture, its tone, the way it creeps around corners and spills across stone. Your uncle claims he can tell the difference between 9 a.m. and 9:15 just by the angle of sunlight on his goats. But there are official keepers of time, priestly men with shaved heads and serious faces. They watch the shadows from temple courtyards, adjusting rituals to align with the god's invisible calendar. Ra, after all, demands punctuality. You pass a temple gate and catch sight of one of these time-watching priests. He's standing perfectly still, back straight, eyes locked on the ground. His gaze isn't blank, it's mathematical. You follow it and see why. The tall granite obelisk planted in the courtyard is casting its first sharp morning shadow, reaching like a sundial's arm across the paving stones. And here's the trick. They've marked it. Tiny notches, shallow grooves in the stone, divide the day like slices of pomegranate. It's a full-body experience. Reading time in this world, your eyes squint, your skin feels the warmth of each hour, your shadow dances behind or beside you like a slow companion. No 2 days are perfectly alike. The sun shifts slightly, seasons bend the angles. Historians still argue whether these early divisions were formal hours or more poetic approximations. What's certain, The Egyptians didn't just look at light, they listened to it. As you keep walking, a neighbor points to the shadow and says, "Time for offering," and disappears into his doorway. His shadow swallows behind him like a retreating tide. You pass vendors setting up, bread sellers brushing yesterday's dust from flatbreads, a girl counting date clusters in bundles of 10. She's doing math with pebbles, time, trade, and the gods, all swirl together here. It's not just about knowing when to wake up or nap. The temples are aligned to celestial paths. The offerings must hit precise windows of Ra's journey across the sky. And your neighbor's daughter wants to know exactly when her wedding is lucky. Suddenly, the sun clears a rooftop, and your own shadow vanishes beneath you. You've hit the first true moment of the day. Solar noon is still far off, but the light is rising fast. There's no time to dawdle. You duck into a shaded alley and pass a water carrier. He's mumbling to himself, a list of delivery times memorized not by number, but by where the shadow lands when he rounds the pottery kiln. His skin is leathered from decades of sun chasing. Back at your home, your aunt is lining up jars on the roof edge, not for drying, for checking their shadows. The tallest jar casts a spear of shade just shy of the third stair. That's when she'll call for lunch. You pour a bowl of lentils, eat quietly, and lean against the warm stone wall. In this ancient world, your clock is the sun, your calendar is the river, and your alarm is probably a rooster or an old woman with great lungs. And still, somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder, how did they measure time when the shadows disappeared? You'll find out soon. But for now, the light sharpens, the city murmurs, and you get up, shadows stretching long behind you like a slow echo of yourself. You don't usually look up. The ground demands your attention. Muddy paths, loose stones, occasional goose droppings with strategic placement. But today, you pause. Ahead of you stands a massive obelisk, rising like a finger toward the gods. It's not new to you. You've passed it every market day since childhood. But now, thanks to yesterday's overheard temple gossip, you look differently. The obelisk isn't just a monument. It's a timepiece. And right now, it's stretching a long, dramatic shadow across the courtyard, like it's painting the ground with invisible ink. You step closer and notice faint lines scratched into the paving stones. 12 of them in a semicircle. Each one represents a moment, a sliver of day sliced by the sun. And get this, these lines aren't evenly spaced. The Egyptian hour isn't fixed. It flexes with the season. In winter, when days are short, the daylight hours shrink. In summer, they stretch. It's why the priest with the smirk yesterday told you your hour wasn't the same size as his hour. He wasn't being philosophical. He was just telling time. You sit on a sun-warmed stone nearby and watch. The shadow of the obelisk slowly creeps, silent and unstoppable, like syrup poured across stone. This is what time feels like when it isn't buzzing or blinking. It leans, it reaches, it reminds. An old man joins you. He carries a clay pot on one hip and leans on a staff with the other. He nods toward the obelisk. "See that third notch?" he says, pointing with a crusty finger. "When the shadow touches it, I feed the goats." You wait. The shadow slides across the groove. He nods again, gets up, and hobbles away. The goats, presumably, are thrilled. Historians still argue whether obelisks like this were strictly for ceremonial timekeeping or had everyday applications too. Some say they were mostly symbolic, spiritual reminders of Ra's journey across the sky. Others point to practical uses, coordinating offerings, organizing labor, or, as you just saw, knowing when to feed goats. Frankly, it's all of the above. There's even speculation that multiple obelisks formed primitive sun calendars. Place one in the right spot and let it cast its shadow across seasonal markers. The solstices, equinoxes. Egyptians knew them all, long before Galileo and friends made their telescopes. You stand and walk slowly around the obelisk, eyes on the shadow like a cat stalking a ribbon. And for a moment, you feel incredibly small. This stone has been standing here longer than any scroll, any emperor, any faded god painted on a wall, and yet it still tells the truth, at least when the sky cooperates. But you already know the limits. A single cloud, a dust storm, or even the hour before dusk can blur these lines. That's why they developed backups. Shadow-based timekeeping had its glory, but in Egypt, the sun wasn't always enough. When it failed, or dipped low, they turned to bowls. Still, the obelisks remain. Tall, silent, monumental timekeepers. Even now, thousands of years later, they cast shadows in Paris, London, New York. Yes, really. The Egyptians carved time into stone, and now those stones quietly stretch their shadows across continents. You wonder if anyone else looks down to check the time. A priest walks by. He barely glances at you but bows slightly to the obelisk, a gesture so habitual you're not sure he even notices it anymore, like someone saluting a flag or whispering a quick prayer. Respect for time, not because it's scarce, but because it's sacred. You wander past the shadow's edge, and as it slides behind you, it feels like stepping out of one world and into another. Behind you, geometry, astronomy, and divine symbolism. Ahead of you, the scent of fresh bread, temple bells in the distance, and an oddly rhythmic dripping sound. That dripping, that's your next stop. The sound grows clearer with every step. A slow, steady plink, like a lazy frog jumping into a metal bowl again and again. You duck under an archway, pass a linen vendor sweeping dust from her mat, and finally enter a shaded side chamber tucked into the edge of a temple wall. It's cool inside. The air smells of old stone, dried lotus leaves and something faintly metallic. You blink until your eyes adjust, and then you see it. A shallow ceramic bowl placed carefully on a stand beside it. A tilted jar with a small hole drilled into the bottom. The jar is dripping, a single drop at a time, plunking into the bowl with monastic patience. This, you realize, is a water clock, or clepsydra, if you're feeling Greek about it. Egyptians may have had a different name entirely, though historians haven't agreed on one. Whatever you call it, it works like this. Water drips at a steady rate, slowly filling the bowl. Inside the bowl, there are lines, etched time markers, like a reverse measuring cup, but for passing hours instead of ingredients. And here's the most elegant part. It doesn't need the sun, no shadows, no obelisks, just water, gravity, and math. While the obelisk depends on Ra to shine, the clepsydra works in the dark. In fact, it's because the shadows disappear at night that this invention mattered so much. You sit down beside the bowl, cross-legged like a curious apprentice. A young boy nearby, clearly a temple student, leans over the bowl and marks a papyrus scroll as the water climbs past the third notch. His handwriting is uneven but careful. This is his job, to note the hour when the gods should receive their second prayer of the night. You ask him quietly how he knows the water is dripping evenly. He shrugs, then gestures to a second jar placed nearby, almost identical in size and hole width. Redundancy is holy in Egypt. Historians still argue whether the earliest water clocks originated here or in Mesopotamia. Some claim the concept drifted west from Babylon. Others argue Egypt's version came first and was simply refined later. What we know is this: Egyptian clepsydras are some of the oldest surviving timekeeping devices that don't rely on the sun. A priest enters and murmurs a blessing over the water before checking the bowl. You notice his robes are ink-stained, his sandals dusty. This man has likely been on calendar duty for decades, and still he bows ever so slightly to the humble dripping pot. It may not look divine, but it orders the divine. You glance closer and spot something quirky. The lines inside the bowl are spaced differently depending on the month. Turns out, even water clocks need seasonal adjustments. Warmer months make water flow faster. Colder months slow it down. Egyptian timekeepers adjusted their equipment like you adjust your thermostat. In the corner of the room, an older clepsydra sits dry and cracked, a relic from centuries before. It's larger, less precise, and there are faint traces of blue paint along the rim. Someone, at some point, tried to make time beautiful. The boy taps the bowl and leans in. His eyes widen. The fourth notch is full. He stands quickly and races to ring a chime outside the door. A small copper bell with a surprisingly sweet tone. That sound signals the next prayer cycle across the temple complex. You follow him out and see other students responding, lighting oil lamps, preparing incense. The entire sacred routine hinges on those water drops, on bowls and patience and calibrated drips. You wonder what happens when something goes wrong. A clogged hole, a leaky bowl. Does time stop for the gods? Does the ritual lose power? Or is it just rescheduled like a postponed meeting with Pharaoh? One of the senior temple scribes answers your question before you ask it. He's nearby, talking to another apprentice. If the bowl flows too fast, he says, we pray too early, and Thoth frowns. If it flows too slow, we pray late, and Ra closes his ears. Time is divine, but fragile. You step back and listen. The dripping has become hypnotic. The quiet chamber, the cool stone, the patient math of the gods. It all feels oddly modern. You've seen high-tech labs less organized. Even now, in museums across the world, you can find fragments of these bowls. They're cracked, dry, silent, but the lines are still there, faded notches whispering from another world. Inscriptions etched along the rim sometimes give instructions or tell which deity the bowl was dedicated to. Some mention festivals, others contain what appear to be jokes or puns. A sleepy timekeeper's sense of humor, maybe. You return to the entrance and pause. In the late afternoon light, the shadows are beginning to stretch again. That familiar slant returns as the sun dips westward. You've gone from one form of time to another, from shadow to water, from light to drip, and somehow they both feel equally alive. It's almost dinner. You should get going, but you look back one last time, and the water plinks again. You make your way back into the warmth, stepping from the cool hush of the temple chamber into the late afternoon haze. The light is golden now, filtering through palm fronds and kicking up motes of dust that swirl lazily through the air. People are bustling around you again, their movements sharper, more focused. The shadows have grown long and dramatic, stretching like fingers across the courtyards and walkways. Your path takes you toward the palace quarter, not because you belong there. Frankly, you'd be turned away if you tried to stroll in without purpose, but because you've been asked to help deliver some offerings: dried fish, preserved dates, a small jar of honey. You carry them in a reed basket, careful not to spill. As you near the palace walls, you begin to notice something strange. Every movement, every gesture, every action seems perfectly timed. The guards swap posts at the exact moment the sun hits a certain tile on the western wall. A servant walks briskly past, announcing the start of a new hour, not with a bell, but with a whisper and a nod to a scribe. A scribe who immediately jots something down on papyrus and signals a steward with a flick of the wrist. This isn't coincidence, it's royal timekeeping. At the palace level, time is not simply tracked, it is orchestrated, measured not only by light or water, but by protocol, prestige, and divine approval. You reach a service entrance and are let in by a sleepy-looking guard who barely glances at your basket. Inside, the palace is cooler, smoother, and somehow quieter. Even here, though, you see the marks of time, painted notches on pillars, stone grooves worn into the floor where light falls at noon. Even Pharaoh's schedule obeys the shadows. Historians still argue about how much control pharaohs personally had over these schedules. Some believe they were involved in every hour of palace routine. Others say it was their officials and priests who obsessed over every shadow's angle. But all agree, royal life in Egypt was ruled by rhythm. You're ushered into a side chamber where a steward receives the offerings. He thanks you with a nod, checks a nearby sundial placed on a windowsill, then scribbles something on his schedule tablet. A daily log, no doubt, one that tracks deliveries down to the sliver of the hour. And that sundial, it's tiny, not the towering stone kind from the temple. This one fits in your hand, carved from polished wood. A metal pin jutting from its center to cast a tiny shadow over neatly spaced lines. It's angled carefully toward the sun. A delicate little piece of personal tech in a world still mostly made of stone. Take this to the garden, the steward tells a boy, handing off the sundial like a baton in a race. His Majesty will want to see the hour before he walks. Even leisure in the palace is timed. You step back outside and wander toward the outer gardens. There, noble children are playing under the supervision of a stern-looking tutor. He's got a sundial of his own, brass, portable, shaped like a small triangle that folds flat. He sets it on a stone bench and watches it as intently as if it were going to speak. One of the children runs past you, nearly knocking over a jug of milk. Her chaperone laughs, but still glances at the sundial before deciding whether it's time to call her back. Nearby, a priest from the temple is deep in conversation with a royal astrologer. They're pointing at a set of stars carved into a board, symbols for hours, seasons, lunar cycles. The priest looks annoyed, as if the stars have moved without his permission. You don't belong here, but no one's stopping you. So you linger, watching how every act, even the most mundane, is given a kind of sacred structure through timekeeping. Meals, prayers, walks, meetings, even naps. Yes, scheduled naps. Everything here fits into a rhythm shaped by tools and tradition. You wonder how the pressure must feel, living like this, where even your digestion has a window of divine convenience, where a sneeze from the pharaoh could shift the timing of an entire afternoon's schedule. Back near the palace wall, an old man is repairing a larger sundial embedded into the courtyard floor. He's brushing away dirt, realigning its metal pin with the north, muttering something about too much wind. He glances up, sees you watching, and winks. Better late than never, he says. Unless you're a priest, then never's not an option. You laugh and walk on, the scent of date wine trailing from a nearby servant's tray. The sun is beginning its descent now, the shadows growing longer, the rhythm of the palace entering its evening phase. Back in your village, time bends gently around cooking fires and family stories. But here, inside Egypt's royal heart, it's pinned and measured and documented with the precision of a 1,000-year-old clock. And yet, even with all this order, there's a certain peace in it. The comfort of predictability, of knowing that when the sun hits that stone, it's time to pray or eat or bow. You leave the palace complex quietly, the guards nodding as you pass, and behind you, the great obelisks and sundials continue their silent work, tracing light across history. You walk away from the palace and down a long avenue lined with sycamore trees. Their leaves tremble gently in the warm breeze, casting broken shadows across your path. The Nile glimmers in the distance, and you feel that strange balance of movement and stillness that defines this place. Even when nothing seems to be happening, time is always flowing. You pass a group of older women sitting in a half circle just beyond the temple's outer wall. They're weaving baskets and gossiping, and from the way they pause and glance at the sun's angle between each sentence, you realize something odd. Even casual conversation here seems synced to light. You keep walking, and then you reach a wide field bordered by a line of short palm trees. This is where the farmers are finishing up their day's work, pulling their tools from the dry earth and patting down their woven hats. The scent of damp soil clings to the air, mixed with the sweet dust of papyrus reeds. Here, you see another layer of Egyptian timekeeping come to life. Seasonal rhythms, not just hourly ones. This isn't about shadows or dripping bowls anymore. This is the solar calendar at work, built around the Nile and its moods. The farmers are talking about the flood. You overhear a tall man in a red tunic say, "Only 10 more days before the river swells." His neighbor nods and points at the sky. "Sirius is climbing," he says simply, as if that explains everything. And here, it does. You've heard this before. Sirius, the dog star, is their warning bell. When it first appears just before dawn, an event called the Heliacal Rising, everyone knows the inundation is near. The Nile will spill its banks, soak the fields, and leave behind dark, fertile silt, perfect for planting. That's why the Egyptian year begins in July, not January. The calendar doesn't start with winter's chill, but with water, rebirth, and mud. The man in red tunic continues his work, driving a wooden stake into the earth near a canal. On the stake are carved grooves, water-level markers. This is a nilometer, a tool used for measuring flood levels. Not fancy, but effective. The farmers use it to guess what kind of harvest they'll get. Too little water is disaster. Too much is also a problem. Time and balance, always walking hand in hand. Historians still argue whether every village had its own system for reading the Nile, or if they all followed centralized reports from temples. There's evidence of both. But one thing's clear. Egyptians didn't just watch the water. They counted its moods, year after year, until those patterns became prophecy. A little boy runs past, barefoot, laughing. He stops near a patch of tall grass and points to a beetle slowly rolling a ball of dung. His older sister catches up, and she gently pulls him away. "No time for scarabs," she says. "Mother's stew is almost ready. The sun's touching the canal wall." That's not metaphor. You look where she's pointing, and sure enough, the sun has dipped low enough that its light skims the surface of the western canal, casting a perfect golden glow across the water. That's their dinner bell. You watch as they disappear into the growing shadows, leaving behind a half-plucked melon and a crooked hoe. The light continues to bend, warm and liquid, and you can almost feel the calendar turning with it. Days like this aren't just measured, they're harvested. Nearby, a priest is talking to a landowner, showing him a papyrus with markings you can't quite read from here. But you know it's a schedule, a planting chart that aligns celestial events with agricultural work. It's part astrology, part science, part tradition, and somehow it works. You sit under a tree and think about how deeply time is rooted here. It's not abstract or mechanical. It's something physical, tactile, dirty, glowing. It lives in floodwaters and beetles, in the crackling mud and cracked fingertips of old men pulling onions from the ground. Someone offers you a piece of roasted corn wrapped in a fig leaf. You accept, eat slowly, and let the moment stretch. The sun continues its descent, and the light is now warm enough to make everything feel dipped in honey. Your stomach full and your mind quiet, you lean back and watch the shadows lengthen across the earth. No one rushes here. They don't have to. When time lives in the sky and rises with the river, there's no need to chase it. And yet, they're always watching, always marking, always ready. It's almost night, and you realize you haven't seen the last of these calendars yet. There's a stone staircase at the edge of the field, half covered in moss, leading up toward the temple observatory. That's where they keep the stars. You climb the worn staircase slowly, the stone cool beneath your feet where the sun hasn't reached it for hours. Above you, the temple observatory sits quiet and deliberate, not towering or flashy, but solid and unshakable. You pause near the top step to catch your breath, and already you can feel the shift. Air thinner, wind calmer, and the sound of the earth below fading into a kind of respectful hush. Up here, you aren't alone. A group of robed priests are moving silently around the flat rooftop space, laying out polished tools and smooth stone tablets marked with geometric carvings. Several of them tilt their heads to the sky, squinting at points you can't yet see. The light is nearly gone, but they know what's coming. This is the realm of the celestial timekeepers, the sky readers, the ones who build calendars, not from shadows or bowls, but from stars. One priest in particular draws your attention. He's older, his robe cleaner, his posture impossibly straight. He places a small notched sighting tool, a kind of ancient quadrant, against his eye and begins tracking something silently across the horizon. You sit quietly at the edge, careful not to disturb them, and follow his gaze. There, in the first darkening stretch of sky, a single star emerges, blinking faintly just above the curve of the mountains. It's Sirius again, and with it comes more than beauty. It's a signal, the herald of flood season, the celestial anchor for the Egyptian New Year. They've been watching this star rise at dawn for centuries, marking its reappearance with ritual, relief, and record-keeping. This is no casual stargazing. It's calendar work. The Egyptians tracked 36 groups of stars called decans, using their risings and settings to divide the night into intervals. One decan would rise approximately every 40 minutes, creating a kind of stellar clock. Historians still debate how precisely these decans were used in daily life. Some claim they were reserved for religious rituals and elite astrologers. Others argue they shaped timekeeping throughout society, from workers' schedules to harvest planning. One priest takes a deep breath and begins softly chanting. The others join him, their low tones creating a kind of rhythm that feels half musical, half mathematical. Their eyes never leave the sky. It's as though they're speaking directly to time. You inch closer to one of the tools left unattended on the stone floor. It's made of wood and string, with holes drilled at regular intervals and tiny star symbols etched in a spiral pattern. You recognize it as an ancient star clock, likely used to calculate how far through the night they've progressed based on which star is directly overhead. It occurs to you that while modern astronomers use lenses and lasers, these priests needed nothing more than sight, memory, and the patience of stone. One of the younger initiates joins you at the edge. He whispers that this temple has kept star records for generations, passing observations from teacher to student without ever writing them down in full. Too powerful, he says, too easy to misread. The stars climb slowly, predictably, beautifully, and all around you, the city begins to fade into shadow. You can still see distant torchlight along the river banks and hear the muffled clang of a cooking pot somewhere far below. But up here, it's like you've stepped out of the world. The priests move from star to star, noting each one's position, occasionally adjusting a line on a tablet or muttering a correction to a student. You realize they're resetting the calendar, updating the cosmic clockwork to keep Egypt in sync with the heavens. And you start to see how it all fits together. The obelisks track the sun. The bowls track the hours in darkness. The fields bend to Sirius and the seasons. And the temples, high above it all, pull time down from the stars and turn it into ritual. Even funerals are planned according to these cycles. Certain star risings are considered lucky for burial. Others, less so. You make a mental note to die during a favorable deacon, just in case. A small bell rings, a soft, clear chime, and the priests begin to pack up their instruments. One of them throws a cloth over the stone tablets. Another blows out a small oil lamp that had barely flickered through the dusk. The ceremony is over, but the work continues. They'll be back again tomorrow, and the night after that, not to discover the stars, but to maintain them, to be sure that Egypt runs not just on grain and gold, but on celestial confidence. You stand and stretch your legs, the stars now thick across the sky. The Nile below glows faintly with starlight, and you feel, somehow, exactly on time. No watches, no clocks, just stars, breath, and memory. You descend the stairs slowly, your footfalls softer than before, as though you're trying not to disturb the sky. At the foot of the staircase, the world feels heavier again. You step from the cool breath of starlight into the practical pulse of evening. The streets are quieter now, but not silent. Somewhere, a baby cries, a jar clinks against stone, and from the river you hear the splash of someone washing off the day. You turn toward a different part of the city now, where homes huddle in close and life is less divine. This is the workers' quarter, a sprawl of mud brick houses and stone pathways worn smooth by generations of sandaled feet. You walk between them and notice something that hadn't struck you before. Every few buildings, scratched faintly into the wall, are shadow marks, little notches, lines, and dots, like graffiti, but with purpose. You pause to examine one. It's just above eye level, and you realize it's meant to catch a very specific moment, likely when the morning sun first hits this particular wall. A woman comes outside holding a clay bowl of lentils. She notices you staring and smiles. "That one's mine," she says. "It tells me when to send my boys to the work site." You ask what happens if it's cloudy, and she laughs. "Then they go early and complain all day." Down the lane, you hear hammers tapping stone. Even now, someone's finishing a task before darkness makes it impossible. And that brings you to something most people never think about when imagining Egypt: shift work. Even pyramid laborers worked by schedule. The great projects of Egypt, the temples, tombs, pyramids, they weren't built by slaves working non-stop under whips. That's a myth. They were built by organized teams, skilled and semi-skilled laborers divided into rotating shifts, each with their own foreman, tasks, and yes, their own time markers. You wander toward the edge of the quarter, where the stonecutters operate. There's a long, low shed where men sit on overturned baskets, grinding chisels and wrapping sore wrists. In front of them is a long stone slab, nothing fancy, but on its surface, drawn in charcoal, are 12 rough divisions, one for each hour of daylight. An overseer walks up and points at the 6th line. "We stop here," he says. "When the sun hits that mark, we switch crews." You realize the stone is a shift sundial, improvised but functional. The workers may not have temple-grade instruments, but they've made their own ways to keep time. You sit with one of the masons for a moment while he sharpens a chisel. "We don't need to know the number," he says, "just when to stop." He dips his tool in oil, then chuckles, "And when to run if we're late." Historians still argue whether these labor divisions were purely functional or if there were ritual reasons behind shift changes. Some scholars believe shifts were timed to sacred numbers, aligning work with religious meaning. Others say it was about efficiency, the original time clock. What's certain is that time was taken seriously, even here, especially here. If a worker failed to show at his proper hour, there were consequences. Rations docked, names noted, reputations dimmed. Time wasn't just about the gods. It was about fairness, order, rhythm. A boy jogs past you carrying a pottery jar on his head. He glances at the shadows stretching across the wall and picks up speed, trying to beat the dusk. Another young man checks a line drawn on the ground next to a post. If the sun's still touching it, they have 20 more minutes. And so, even in the corners of Egyptian society, far from polished obelisks and temple chants, shadow tells stories. Here, a shift ends when the shadow kisses a doorway, or when the wall glows golden, or when the overseer's voice cracks like a whip, not from cruelty, but from the pressure of coordination. One of the older men leans back and squints at the light. "Almost time," he says. "Another hour and the mosquitoes take over anyway." He spits into the dust and gets to his feet. As the last bits of sun slip behind the rooftops, the noise changes. Chisels are packed, sandals slapped against stone. Laughter returns as bodies relax, knowing they've done enough to earn supper. You walk with them for a while, letting the mood carry you down the hill. Someone starts humming a low, rhythmic tune. Another picks it up, and before long, a dozen voices carry the tune like it's tradition, which it is. Songs to mark the end of the day, as old as the first brick laid on the first temple wall. No bells, no sirens, just shadow and song. And still, even now, you catch the soft whisper of time beneath it all, murmuring in cracks and corners, waiting for the sun to rise again. You follow the workers as they split off in pairs and groups, their laughter slowly fading into the maze of narrow alleyways. The city is settling, softening, like a loaf of bread cooling on a windowsill. The last of the market stalls are being covered. Chickens are herded into woven cages, and oil lamps begin to flicker into life behind thin linen curtains. Your feet take you toward a quiet lane, where a warm yellow glow spills from an open doorway. Inside, a man is bent over a table, arranging small objects in tidy rows. You pause at the entrance, and he glances up. "Come in," he says, without looking up again. You're just in time. You step inside and feel the cool clay underfoot. This is no home. It's a tool room, or maybe a workshop, but quieter, more focused. The shelves are lined with smooth wooden boxes, and on the table lie instruments you've never seen before. Bronze rods, cords with knots, polished stones with tiny lines etched in concentric circles. He gestures to one of the boxes, opens it, and shows you what's inside. A collection of shallow, rounded bowls with small holes drilled into the bottom. These are water clocks, not yet filled. He's cleaning them, inspecting them, measuring the depth of each notch etched along the interior curve. You have to carve the lines just right, he says, or time leaks too fast. He smiles at his own joke, but there's seriousness in his eyes. To him, these aren't just bowls. They're calibrated machines, sacred instruments. He picks up a rod with fine markings etched along its length. This is a gnomon, the vertical stick that casts shadows on sundials. He spins it lightly between his fingers, then places it in a small stand, adjusting the angle with the precision of someone who's done this every day for 20 years. Beside it sits a knotted cord, each knot evenly spaced. He explains that it's a measuring rope, used to align sundials and obelisks with astronomical events, even temples themselves. If your rope is wrong, he says, your whole calendar shifts, and the gods arrive late. You both laugh, but again, there's truth behind it. Historians still debate how standard these tools were across Egypt. Some suggest each temple developed its own versions, while others argue for a more centralized method of production. Either way, it's clear these items weren't made casually. They were crafted, tested, corrected, and revered. The man pulls out a thin piece of polished slate and sets it beside the tools, etched with rows of tiny characters. "This is my correction chart," he says. "Water flows faster in the heat, so I mark the drift here and adjust the next batch." You stare at the sheet. Mathematics without numbers, logic without formula, yet it's all there, perfectly structured. Then he shows you something unusual, a curved piece of wood with a series of pegs and small colored beads that slide along a channel. "This one's for children," he says. "Helps them learn to track the hours by moving the bead when the shadow hits the mark. A teaching tool disguised as a toy. You imagine a classroom of barefoot kids squinting at the sun and trying to figure out if they've earned a break. And somehow, it feels not so different from the world you know. There's a small scroll tucked into the corner of the table. The man unrolls it and reveals what looks like a diagram of a portable sundial. It's shaped like a half moon, with hour lines radiating outward from a central point. A hole is drilled in the side for string. It would have been worn around the neck. "You can travel with time," he says proudly. "Even if the sun's different, you can still find noon." The idea strikes you. Time is something personal, portable, adjustable, not just dictated from above, but held in the palm of your hand. A chicken clucks outside the doorway, breaking the silence for a moment, and the man looks up, noticing the dimming light. "Almost supper," he mutters, then begins carefully placing each item back into its box, one by one, like precious relics. You help him blow out the oil lamp and step back into the evening air. Your eyes adjust again, and you see the sky has shifted. The stars are reappearing, and somewhere far away, a temple bell rings once, soft and deep, a reminder that even without tools, the night itself is still a clock. You glance at your hands, still a little dusty from the bowls, and think about all the ways time has passed through them tonight. Water, shadow, star, and now bronze, cord, and clay. Time is measured. Time is made. And in places like this, time is kept. The air is cooler now, brushing softly against your skin as you leave the toolmaker's workshop behind. The quiet has settled into the city like a wool blanket, muffling footsteps and softening the edges of noise. You turn down another street, led not by any plan, but by the flicker of lamplight and a child's distant laugh. You find yourself in a small courtyard near the edge of a residential quarter. Here, under a tangle of vines and a crumbling fig tree, a group of children sits in a half circle on the ground, their faces lit by the warm glow of a single oil lamp perched on a flat stone. At the center is an older woman, gray hair pulled back, robe smudged with ash and flour, telling a story, not a myth, not a god tale, but something more playful, a kind of riddle wrapped in a rhyme. You pause near the edge of the courtyard, unnoticed, listening. When the stick is short, the day is tall. When the stick is gone, you've missed it all. The children laugh and shout guesses. One of them says, "Noon," and the woman claps her hands. "Yes," she says. That's when the sun sits right above your head and the world forgets how to cast shadows. She picks up a small clay disc and shows them. It's a child's sundial, flat, hand-sized, with a stubby pin at the center and uneven lines scratched around its edge. "You want to know the time?" she asks. "Ask the sun, but do it before your shadow disappears." The children pass the disc around, each holding it up and tilting it toward the light. Their little fingers trace the grooves. Their brows furrow in concentration. You watch one boy hold it too high, causing the shadow to vanish. "Try again," the woman says gently. Time only shows itself to those who are patient. Another child produces a piece of painted wood shaped like a bird, with holes drilled through its body. "Time bird," he calls it proudly. "I made it with my uncle." You recognize it as a type of primitive noon marker, its holes aligned to let sunlight pass through only when the sun reaches a specific height. Historians still argue whether these tools were common teaching aids or more symbolic. But here, in this courtyard, There's no debate. These are lessons, and the kids are learning how to read the world. It strikes you as brilliant. Time here isn't taught as an abstract number. It's a sensory game. It's watching light, feeling heat, noticing the angle of your own shadow as it slinks behind you. They don't memorize minutes. They observe. The woman calls out another rhyme. Count the drops and mark the bowl. The gods won't come if it's not whole. She sets a tiny water jar on a flat board, and the children crowd around as she uncorks it slowly, letting a thin stream of water flow into a small dish lined with pebbles. Each pebble marks a moment, she says. When the bowl fills to this line, we must light the lamp. The girl nearest the dish leans in too close and giggles when a drop lands on her nose. Everyone laughs, and the woman smiles, but then she becomes serious. Remember, she says, the gods don't like to wait. Even Ra has a schedule. The children nod solemnly. You can't help but grin, thinking how strange and wonderful it is that they're learning devotion and astronomy at the same time, that somewhere between "don't touch the pot" and "stay away from scorpions," they also hear "respect the shadow." One of the older boys pulls out a board covered in etched dots and dashes. "Watch this," he says, and spins it gently in the lamplight. A shadow dances across its surface. He follows it with his finger, counting softly. The board is a sort of hour game, designed to help kids understand the passing of time during festivals or chores. You sit on a nearby bench, and for a while you forget that you're supposed to be learning too. You just watch. The giggles, the clapping, the pride on their faces when they guess the right answer or tilt the sundial correctly. It's simple, and it's beautiful. Eventually, the lamp sputters, and the woman nods. "Time for sleep," she says. "You want Ra to find you rested." The kids groan but stand, tucking their little tools and toys back into baskets and cloth pouches. A few wave at you, assuming you're just another neighbor, which, in this moment, you are. You glance up. The stars are bright now, and you know that across the city, priests are watching them too. Maybe one of those same stars will become a riddle tomorrow night, passed down from this woman to the next set of tiny timekeepers. As the courtyard empties, you feel something new settle in your chest. Not awe exactly, but a kind of comfort, knowing that even here, in the quietest corner of the city, time is not just understood, it's played with, shared, sung about. It's not something you chase. It's something you grow up alongside. You wander on in the dark now, guided only by the silvery gleam of starlight on dusty stone. There's no urgency in your steps, no destination pulling you forward, just the soft rhythm of your sandals, the occasional bark of a dog in the distance, and the quiet curiosity that's carried you all day. The streets are mostly empty, but you're not alone. A few torch-bearers still move about. Temple guards, late workers, the kind of people whose jobs refuse to end when the sun does. They pass you without a word, their footsteps syncopated with the night. Eventually, your path curves past the edge of a quiet compound, tucked behind high clay walls with faded carvings near the base. A flicker of movement draws your eye, and you see a pair of young men crouched beside a wooden chest, lifting out tools and murmuring to each other in low voices. They don't notice you at first, but as you step closer, one looks up and smiles. "Come see," he says. "We're taking inventory." You accept the invitation without hesitation, stepping into the lamplight. Around you, the courtyard is lined with open crates, shallow shelves, and a few half-covered clay jars. Everything here seems built for function, not display. But what catches your attention is the sheer variety of instruments. Bowls of all sizes, some notched, some smooth. Measuring ropes, carefully looped. Tiny compasses made from carved shell. Gnomons and rods stacked like walking sticks. A full tool kit for measuring time, all packed away for easy transport. "This one came from Thebes," the taller man says, holding up a bronze gnomon with little stars etched along the base. "We used it during the flood festival last year," his companion adds. "Only worked until midday. Clouds came early, and we had to switch to water bowls." You laugh, and they do too. A moment of shared amusement at time's slippery nature. They show you a particularly beautiful object next. A small wooden box lined with beeswax. Inside are thin slivers of copper arranged like rays around a circle. "This one's for aligning sundials," they explain. "Keeps them true to the cardinal points." The wax softens in the heat and lets the copper shift if needed, then hardens again to hold its shape. It's self-adjusting in a way that feels shockingly modern. Historians still puzzle over the full extent of Egyptian timekeeping technology. So many tools have been lost to time or exist only in fragments. But moments like this make it clear. There was a system, and it had depth. You ask them who uses these now, and the shorter man shrugs. Some go to temples, some to schools. Sometimes we lend them for weddings or funerals, if the ceremony needs to match a star or a season. It dawns on you. These tools don't just live in dusty corners or sacred vaults. They move through the city into people's lives, appearing when precision is necessary and vanishing again once the moment has passed. A rope catches your eye, strung between two clay jars. It has colored knots along its length, red, blue, green, and gold. "That one tracks festival time," one of the men says. "Each knot matches a chant or a bell. You burn incense when the smoke hits the red one. You touch the rope gently, and it sways slightly, as if it remembers being moved by sacred breath. The younger of the two reaches into another box and pulls out something unexpected. A worn linen scroll filled with what appears to be timing instructions, not in hours or dates, but in actions. Lines like, "When the second shadow reaches the doorway, bring water to the dancers." After the priest passes the third column, begin the flute. It reads like stage directions for a cosmic play. And maybe that's exactly what it is. You can't help but marvel, realizing just how coordinated their world is, how deeply woven time is into every gesture. The older man returns a sundial to its case and closes the lid with care. Everything in its right place, he says, and there's a quiet satisfaction in the words. You help them clean up, placing a few ropes and bowls back into their crates. And when you're done, they offer you a cup of barley tea, still warm from the coals. You sip in silence, surrounded by tools that once tracked the turning of stars, the movement of shadows, the drip of sacred water. It's not glamorous, it's not divine, but it is devoted. Here, time isn't just something that passes. It's something you prepare for, something you carry, something you respect. As you leave, one of them hands you a small token, a clay disc with a faint groove etched across its surface. Just a marker, he says, in case you need to find your way back. You tuck it into your robe pocket and step into the night again, carrying a little piece of Egyptian time with you. The clay disc is warm in your pocket, holding the day's heat like a memory. You rub your thumb across the groove absent-mindedly as you walk. The city is quieter now, the sky darker, but there's still movement in the shadows, still the occasional flicker of a torch or the hush of footsteps on packed dirt. You turn down a lane you haven't seen before, drawn by the sound of voices, sharp, confused, overlapping. Not arguments exactly, but something close, a kind of frustrated chorus. As you round a corner, you find yourself standing at the edge of a courtyard that's clearly not having a normal evening. There's a group of priests gathered, their robes fluttering slightly in the warm breeze. Several of them are pointing at a shadow cast against the wall of a stone column. One older man has a water bowl in his hands, half full and trembling. Two apprentices are marking lines in the dirt with sticks, and nearby, a temple guard stands with arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. You recognize it instantly. Something is wrong with the time. You approach quietly and catch pieces of conversation. The shadow's off. It shouldn't be there yet. The bowl filled too fast today. Someone misaligned the northern marker. I told you we should have adjusted the angle yesterday. They're not panicking, not really, but you can feel the pressure building beneath their words. These aren't just miscalculations. They're disruptions. And in a world where timekeeping is sacred, disruptions are serious. One priest gestures toward the sky. The clouds came early, he mutters. Ra's face was hidden for hours. Another counters. Then why did the water still fill this far? He thrusts the bowl into the air, sloshing its contents dangerously close to the rim. You watch as one of the younger initiates checks a sundial carved into the floor. He frowns, wipes dust away, and checks again. Then he looks up, meeting your eyes by chance. "It doesn't match," he whispers. "None of it matches." And now you understand. The sun disappeared. The water didn't. And now no one agrees on what time it is. It's easy to imagine modern people brushing this off. But here, in this world of coordinated rituals, temple processions, and offerings timed to the moment of stellar alignment, this is no small error. It's a crisis. Someone mentions crocodiles, and you think it's a metaphor at first, until the guard mutters, "There were 3 in the canal this morning. One swam right through the main current." The others go quiet for a moment. Everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one says it out loud. Crocodiles don't change time, but they mean something when they show up like that. It's as if the gods are giving a warning, or maybe, just maybe, they're displeased. Historians still debate whether Egyptians saw such events as superstition or symbolic messaging. Some believe the priests used these disruptions to assert control. Only we can realign the calendar. Others suggest the people genuinely feared losing their temporal harmony. Either way, this moment feels delicate. A senior priest steps forward and raises both hands. "Reset the water clocks," he says calmly. "Realign the shadow markers. Mark the day as irregular. The gods will understand." It's a graceful response, and the tension eases. The apprentices begin emptying bowls and remarking lines. One of them smudges a charcoal line on the sundial and draws it again, slightly farther to the left. You watch the old priest light a small stick of incense and place it beside the faulty sundial. A quiet gesture of respect, maybe even apology. He notices you and nods. "It's not failure," he says softly. "It's a reminder that even time has its moods." You ask if this happens often. "Once or twice a year," he admits, "when the air is thick or the stars hide. It keeps us honest." You're about to ask more, but he walks away, his robe catching the faint breeze like a sail. As the courtyard begins to settle, you linger a little longer. The confusion has passed, but the lesson remains. Sometimes the shadow bends the wrong way. Sometimes the bowl fills too quickly. Sometimes a crocodile swims through the current and everyone gets nervous. Time, for all its elegance, can be unpredictable. And in Egypt, when time breaks, you don't panic. You reset it. You respect it. You try again tomorrow. You leave the courtyard quietly, the scent of incense clinging to your robe. Behind you, the shadow lines are redrawn, the water bowls rinsed, and somewhere in the sky, a single star emerges from behind the clouds, right on cue. You drift farther from the temple quarter now, letting the curve of the road carry you downhill toward a quieter stretch of the city. The wind has picked up a little, brushing cool fingers through your hair, and the faint hum of late-night life returns, soft and slow. pots clinking, someone sweeping a doorstep, a goat grumbling in its sleep. But ahead of you, tucked beside a weather-worn shrine, is a small gathering of men sitting on woven mats. They're dressed in robes of pale linen, some marked with ink stains, others frayed at the cuffs. Their heads are bent over wax tablets and bundles of papyrus, and a dim oil lamp casts long shadows across their faces. They're deep in discussion, their voices quiet but intense. One man gestures sharply toward a chalk drawing scratched on the stone wall behind him, a diagram of intersecting lines and arcs. Beside it, the outline of a seated sphinx, the kind you've seen 100 times on monuments. But this one has a shadow stretching oddly behind it. You ease closer, not wanting to intrude but too curious to walk away. One of the scribes notices you and waves you in. "It's too late to argue alone," he says with a wry smile. More eyes might help. You sit at the edge of the group and take in the full conversation. They're arguing over angles, not of architecture, but of shadows. One man insists the Sphinx casts a longer shadow during the summer solstice than it should. Another says that's impossible, unless the orientation has shifted or the calculations were wrong to begin with. You learn they're trying to align the construction of a new shrine with a very specific solar event, one that only occurs twice a year, when the sun passes directly through two aligned pillars and lands on the base of a sacred statue. It's not just a trick of light, it's a calendar marker, one that guides seasonal rituals and priestly duties. But something's gone off. The most recent measurements didn't match the records from 5 years ago or the records from 50 years ago. And now these men are trying to figure out if the stars have changed, the stone has shifted, or, worst of all, the original calculations were flawed. Historians still argue about just how precise Egyptian alignments truly were. Some point to solar temples and claim pinpoint accuracy. Others argue the deviations were symbolic, not scientific. But here, in this warm little circle, it's clear these men believe every degree matters. One of them unrolls a papyrus covered in tiny rows of numbers, fractions, mostly, broken bits of hours and angles. You can't read it all, but you see a line repeated several times. 1/32 of a shadow too long. It's such a small difference, less than a finger's width on the stone, but they're treating it like a crack in a dam. The oldest among them, a man with a voice like a gravel path, finally speaks. "Even the gods can't fix a crooked axis," he says. Everyone goes quiet. You ask if it's possible the builders of the past simply guessed. Guessed? One of the younger scribes scoffs. "Those men spent 10 years measuring one line. They waited for the same star to rise in the same place 300 times before cutting the first block." Another chimes in. "Some of them went blind staring at the sun just to get the angle right." You believe it? There's something charming about the debate, half science, half poetry. They're talking about time as if it has texture, as if you can fold it, bend it, or straighten it out with enough wax and chalk. And they're not just discussing the present. One man pulls out a battered tablet with carvings so worn they look like memories. This one was copied from a tomb, he says. They were measuring time differently then. Shorter hours, longer shadows, a different rhythm. This opens a whole new round of disagreement. Some argue that timekeeping changed with dynasties, others that the tools evolved faster than the philosophy. You sit and listen, letting the voices rise and fall, the way waves argue with the shore. Eventually, someone produces a tiny, sand-filled hourglass, not Egyptian in origin. It's foreign, maybe Greek. And they all laugh. "That's cheating," someone mutters, and the group nods in unison. You smile too, thinking how even the most precise among them still respect the old ways first. As the night deepens, the group begins packing up their tablets, muttering promises to meet again next week. "If the moon agrees with us," one says. You're handed a small charcoal stick and invited to mark your own prediction on the wall, where you think the sun will land next solstice. You hesitate, then draw a little notch, no wider than a fingernail. They nod approvingly, and one man claps you on the back. "That's as good a guess as any," he says. You stand and stretch, legs tingling from sitting too long. The oil lamp sputters and dies behind you, casting the courtyard back into soft darkness. But somehow you feel brighter. You've just witnessed something few people talk about. Time not as a rule, but as a conversation. A dialogue between sun and stone, between numbers and myth, between generations of scribes who refuse to stop asking, "What if we're off by just a little?" And tonight, that question feels less like a problem and more like a prayer. The city hums quieter now, its breath slow and steady beneath a blanket of stars. You follow a narrow road that curls toward the river, where lanterns reflect gently on the black water. Here, time seems to stretch differently, not in hours or fractions of shadows, but in moments, like skipping stones that disappear without a splash. You notice a caravan of traders settling in near the riverbank, large baskets being lowered from donkeys, fabrics unfurled for bedding, bronze goods gleaming under starlight. Their accents mark them as foreigners, and from their cloaks and tools, you guess Nubians and Greeks, maybe one or two from farther east, drawn to Egypt's marketplaces like moths to the warmth of a flame. One trader is turning a small sundial over in his hands, frowning, then laughing as it refuses to cast a usable shadow. A Greek, judging by his muttered curses, "It worked in Rhodes," he says, "but here it lies." Another man leans over and chuckles. "Of course it does. You're in Egypt. Now you need a different shadow." You sit nearby on an overturned basket, unnoticed for the moment, listening as they compare notes on how people in each region keep time. The Nubian trader points to the moon. Back home, we wait for her to rise before we begin trading, he says. That's when it's safe to speak real prices. Another man, darker skinned and quiet until now, taps the hilt of a curved blade. In my village, he says, we count time by meals, not stars. Breakfast is 1 hour, market is 2. The rest is up to the gods. They all laugh, but there's admiration too. A shared understanding that time, like language, doesn't always translate. One of the Egyptian port officials walks by, carrying a gnomon tucked under his arm. He pauses, overhears their confusion, and kneels beside them. You have to tilt it here, he says, taking the Greek sundial and adjusting its angle ever so slightly. Your sun stands different than ours. Your tools think the day is crooked. The Greek blinks, then grins. So all I needed was a tilt? The official shrugs. Or a bowl of water and a good pair of ears. Historians still debate how Egyptian timekeeping influenced, or was influenced by, neighboring civilizations. The Greeks documented Egypt's astronomy with deep respect, but they also tweaked it, redefined it in their own terms. What's less often told is how Egyptians adjusted too, sharing techniques while never compromising the heart of their calendar. You glance around and notice a small wooden marker sitting in the sand. It's shaped like a turtle, and beside it, someone has drawn lines in the ground with a stick, primitive sun markers in a place where no temples guide the sky, just traveling traders making temporary clocks. There's something beautiful in the makeshift, something real about measuring time with what you have, not what you're told. As the fire crackles in the center of the camp, someone produces a string of tiny bells and begins to chant a rhythmic phrase. A merchant joins in, clapping to match the tempo. Another hums, and soon the camp becomes a tapestry of sound, all tied to a steady beat. It's not formal timekeeping, but it works. Each clap is a second, each breath a minute, each verse a measure of how long the Nile has been listening. You're offered a fig wrapped in palm leaf, and you eat it slowly, grateful for the sweetness and the hospitality. The traders don't ask who you are or why you're here. You're simply part of the rhythm now. Before they sleep, one of them lights a tiny oil lamp and places it next to the turtle marker. We'll wake when the flame dies, he says with a yawn. That's enough clock for tonight. You watch the flame flicker, one tiny voice against the dark, and you think, maybe we don't always need numbers. Maybe feeling time is enough. As you stand and stretch, someone hands you a scrap of parchment. It's a map, barely legible, drawn in haste but full of little marks. Sun symbols, crescent moons, waves, lines of shadow. Trade route, the Nubian says, but more useful as a time map. It tells you when to stop, not just where. You fold it carefully, and slide it into your robe, a gift from those who carry time with them wherever they go. As you leave the camp, you look up. The stars are steady, but your steps feel freer, because tonight you saw something special. Not how Egyptians tell time, but how time bends around those who pass through it. The river glows with starlight now, a long ribbon of silver threading through the blackness. You walk along its edge, feet sinking gently into the cool silt. The traders' camp behind you fades into silence. Only a faint flicker of their firelight remains, and ahead lies another kind of stillness, more permanent, more sacred. You've reached the outskirts of the necropolis, the city of the dead. It's not morbid or frightening here, at least not tonight. The tombs are quiet, carved into the hills or built in clusters of low, square chambers, many topped with faded inscriptions or small statues of guardians keeping eternal watch. You follow a path worn by centuries of feet, not all of them living, and soon find yourself at a modest ceremony already in progress. A group of mourners is gathered around a rectangular tomb entrance, their robes dark but clean, their heads bowed in the soft glow of torchlight. At first glance, it looks familiar. A funeral, like any other you might have seen. But then you notice the instruments. Near the head of the tomb, a priest kneels beside a shallow bowl half filled with water, not for washing, but for measuring. Next to him sits a clay tablet etched with symbols, time markers, and in his hands he holds a small wooden gnomon, perfectly vertical. As the mourners chant, the priest watches the shadow fall across the bowl, then looks up toward the stars, not for guidance, but for alignment. Because here in Egypt, even the dead must follow the clock. The burial isn't done all at once. Each stage is carefully timed, incense burning, recitations, the final sealing of the tomb door, all meant to correspond to cosmic intervals, particularly the rising of key stars and the moon's path through the sky. You've heard before that Egyptians believed in the duat, the underworld, not as a place of torment, but a journey. And just like any journey, it has checkpoints, timed gates, tests, and guardians. The Book of the Dead describes it all in detail. If you know the right words and arrive at the right hour, you pass. If not, well, let's not find out. The priest dips a small reed into the bowl and marks a line on the tablet. You realize he's recording the exact moment the final prayer is spoken. Maybe for the records, maybe for the gods, maybe for the soul itself. Historians still explore the depth of this funerary timing. Some say it was symbolic, some say it was strict. But archaeological evidence shows that water clocks and sundials have been found in tombs, tools buried with the dead so they could keep time in the afterlife. Think about that. In a culture that already took its burial rituals seriously, they still believed you'd need a clock in the next world. A young woman approaches with a linen bundle. She gently places it inside the tomb and whispers something to herself. You can't hear the words, but you recognize the rhythm. She's measuring with her breath, counting under her voice, matching her moment to the chant behind her. Even grief is timed here, not to hurry it, but to frame it. The ceremony nears its end, and a final torch is set into a carved niche by the doorway. The flame will burn until dawn, marking the soul's first night of travel through the duat. When it flickers out, the spirit will be beyond reach. A boy, no older than 10, places a tiny clay sundial beside the tomb. It's cracked, worn, and missing its gnomon, but still, he treats it like gold. His father nods in approval. So they won't lose track, he says, even in the dark. The priest recites one last line, then presses a seal into soft wax at the edge of the entrance. It's done, not just in spirit, but in time. You step back, watching as the mourners disperse, some walking in pairs, some alone, all with heads held a little higher. There's no wailing, no collapse, just the quiet dignity of people who know that endings are measured, too. As you walk through the tomb rows, you spot familiar patterns, sundials etched into walls, faded water clocks carved near tomb entrances, scenes painted with lines connecting stars and words, all meant to guide, to signal, to remind. You pause before one, where the wall shows a boat sailing across a river of stars. Above it, a long rope with knots running from prow to stern. It's not decoration. It's a timeline, one the soul must follow. You can't help but be moved, not just by the beauty, but by the thoughtfulness, the faith in order, in rhythm, in time, as a sacred thread connecting this life to the next. You touch the stone lightly. It's cool, ancient, steady, and you realize you haven't escaped time tonight. You've just been shown its fullest shape. You leave the necropolis slowly, your steps quieter now, the path rising gently away from the tombs and back toward the sleeping city. The wind carries with it a different kind of silence, less like emptiness, more like reverence, as if the earth itself is exhaling after holding its breath all day. Your feet find the worn road leading back to the heart of the village, but something inside you resists returning to walls and lamps. You follow a side path instead, one that leads toward a small hill just outside the city's edge, a place where the desert begins to reclaim the land. You climb in darkness, guided only by starlight and the soft crunch of gravel beneath your sandals. At the top, you find what you didn't know you were looking for: a dig site. Abandoned for the night, but unmistakably active during the day. Tools are stacked in neat rows under canvas tarps. baskets half filled with dust and pottery shards. A small tent nearby still glows faintly from an oil lamp within, the canvas walls fluttering like breath. You step carefully between the excavation pits, drawn toward a shallow trench. At its edge sits a low table, cluttered with notes, brushes, and the bones of ancient tools laid out like puzzle pieces. And there, at the center, is something that steals your breath. A bowl, cracked but intact, with delicate notches carved into its inner curve. A gnomon, snapped but still sharp, its bronze face dulled by sand, but clearly once polished, and a piece of stone with a faint shadow line still visible along its length, drawn by a hand long gone. You crouch beside them, tracing their outlines with your eyes. You don't need a guide to explain what these are. They're clocks, they're memories, they're invitations. You look up, and for a moment, it's as if the stars themselves are watching you watch them. A gust of wind brushes sand over your feet, and suddenly you feel connected to every person who's ever tried to understand time. The priest measuring the drip of water at midnight, the mother lining up her jars at sunrise, the stonecutter checking the shadow before switching shifts, the child reciting a rhyme about shadows and sticks, the astronomer scribbling fractions on a wax tablet, the traveler squinting at a crooked sundial, the soul stepping through the first gate of the duat. Historians still argue about whether timekeeping in ancient Egypt was more symbolic or scientific. But standing here, under the stars, surrounded by broken tools and silent stones, it's clear that it was both. Time wasn't just tracked. It was felt, built, lived. And now, thousands of years later, these instruments, cracked bowls, bent rods, dusty lines, still hold that feeling, like echoes carved into clay. You sit for a while longer, letting the wind pass over you, letting the starlight fill the cracks, letting time slow down until it barely moves at all. Then, finally, you stand. You place one hand gently on the edge of the bowl, not to disturb it, but to say thank you. And you walk back down the hill, not faster, not slower, but with every step aligned to something older than clocks. The city is sleeping, but the night is still keeping watch. So are the stars. And maybe, now, so are you. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift softer, let the last fragments of this journey settle quietly around you. You've walked through temples and workshops, shadow-marked alleyways and starlit tombs. You've listened to bowls whisper time, watched the sun draw silent lines across stone, and felt the breath of history move through your fingertips. There's no need to remember every detail, just the feeling, that sense of stillness, that rhythm older than calendars, that whisper of a world where people didn't rush time. They lived inside it. Let your breath match that rhythm. Now, inhale, like the swell of the Nile. Exhale like a shadow stretching across the courtyard. And if your thoughts begin to wander again, let them. Let them follow the stars, or slip into a boat crossing the underworld, or sit quietly beside a water clock as it marks the hours you no longer need to count. There's nothing left to chase. Nothing urgent remains, just rest, and the quiet confidence that time will carry you safely through the night, just as it always has. So sink a little deeper now, loosen your grip on the waking world, and let yourself float, weightless, through the final minutes of this ancient hour. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. Time will be here when you wake.